Hello and welcome to Partially Redacted, a podcast where we discuss privacy and security engineering and related topics. I'm your host, Sean Falconer, and today I'm joined by Ray Everett, Head of Privacy and Data Protection at Avellino Lab, and we'll be talking about the role of a privacy officer, how to think about finding and hiring a privacy officer, and starting a privacy program. Ray, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sean. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I in many ways, I feel like my introduction hardly gave you justice in terms of your various titles and accomplishments. So why don't we have you expand a bit on your background? Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get to where you are?
Absolutely. So I've been in the privacy and data protection space for about 25 years now. Was one of the very first corporate chief privacy officers ever appointed back in the late 1990s, sort of during the rise of the dot-com era and the use of more consumer and individual personal data for more automated functions and services. Cut my teeth working in-house and doing consulting work for a big swath of the Fortune 500 across finance, technology, telecommunications, healthcare, insurance companies, you name it, and have built more than probably a couple of dozen different privacy programs for companies. Everything from helping them hire their first privacy professionals for their team to building out the policies and programs that they need. Right now, I'm working for a company called Avellino Labs. They are a genetic testing and biotech company facing a lot of sort of the cutting edge issues of privacy and data protection in the genomics and healthcare space. And they brought me on board to help them navigate some of the rocky waters that they're facing as part of that cutting edge work that they're doing.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that they are taking that very seriously, given probably level of sensitivity, the type of information that they're dealing with. They are bringing you in to make sure things are set up from the get-go.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone is concerned about their personal data, but I think there is really no more personal data than your DNA, than your genome. And as powerful as that information is for allowing you to understand your health and your history and your ancestry, it is also deeply tied to who you are and can be used for a variety of purposes that may not be consistent with what you really want your DNA used for. And so building out a privacy and data protection program that is focused on being able to do the cutting edge research that companies like Avellino Lab do, but also protect the privacy and set the appropriate expectations with the data subjects, in this case patients, is really critical to ensuring that patients are comfortable with what's going on and can feel confident that their information is being used to benefit them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned, you've been in this space for now, 25 years or approximately 25 years since sort of the dot-com boom. And you're also, I think, known or have the title of sort of the Chief Privacy Officer of the Internet era. Where did this interest in privacy come from? Like, how did you kind of get started and find that interest and then build this career over this time?
Yeah, when I got out of college, I was working for, actually, it was a... It was an immigration lawyers association. It was a bar association for the immigration industry and immigration community. And I got roped into a weird situation involving some lawyers who were spamming to advertise their services. And one thing led to another, and I wound up in this whole space of how is personal information being used for marketing, for advertising. This was the late 90s, so people were just sort of getting online in large numbers and starting to see lots of spam and starting to be concerned about how their information was being used for both legitimate purposes and illegitimate purposes. I took some time in the late 90s to go to law school, and I was really interested in privacy. And at the time, there was one class in law school about privacy, and it didn't have anything to do with internet or data protection issues as we were starting to see them in the early days of the internet era. And I realized, wow, this is going to be an area that is going to need to be fleshed out more. There's going to need to be a lot more policy and law made in the space. And the deeper I got into it, the more fascinating I found the issues. And so coming out of law school, went to law firm life for a little while, helping companies deal with internet issues writ large, but always keeping an eye on the privacy and security and data protection issues in the space. And eventually wound up coming out to Silicon Valley to join a small startup that was doing some really cool stuff in the internet advertising space. And that's sort of that's where the rocket ship took off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you kind of recognize very early this need that would that essentially the growing technology industry was going to require around personal privacy, management of data, and also probably from a regulation standpoint. But there's still I think we're in a place where a lot of work still needs to be done. What are some of the big changes that you've seen in the last 25 years? In terms of how companies are essentially handling these problems, and maybe the level of seriousness that they take the challenges around privacy?
Well, I think the most important thing that I've seen over the years, and it was really led by the industry itself, was recognizing that consumer trust was critical if you're going to be able to gather and use personal data from consumers. If they didn't understand what you were doing, if they didn't understand how you were doing it and why it benefited them, people were going to be very reticent, and your reputation and the success of your products or services were really going to suffer. And so we saw a lot of early companies, particularly during the .com boom and the early internet days, recognized that they needed to get ahead of the data privacy issues and have a more proactive message for their customers, for their business partners who are going to try and utilize those services and rely on the capabilities and the power that these tools were providing. And so I saw very early on the opportunity to create a role within the organization that was where privacy and data protection issues could live. Someone who could be responsible for those issues, the policies, who could work within the organization to make sure that those policies were given life in the life of the product or service being built. And that was responsible within the organization, sufficiently highly placed in the organization so that they had visibility across the company, across whatever was going on, and could raise the alarm and be taken seriously. And so that was how I helped develop what became the very first chief privacy officer role. Mm-hmm. And working with my CEO at the time, we were able to craft this concept of a chief privacy officer. And within just a year or so from there, went from basically myself to several dozen companies that had appointed chief privacy officers within just a year or two, such that a few years later we were able to start the a professional association of privacy professionals, which today is called the International Association of Privacy Professionals and has like 80,000 members around the globe.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I think that obviously, like privacy professionals, privacy engineering, chief privacy officers, that is a growing field that mm-hmm. I think more and more companies are creating these functions. But there's still a lot of companies, and I think in particular, a lot of people, with engineering backgrounds that aren't used to privacy programs, or even entrepreneurs who started companies and they, didn't have essentially that function. Speaking from my own personal experience, I went from being a founder where we were never, reached a capacity where we had our own privacy function. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until I joined Google that I worked directly with privacy engineering teams and at Skyflow, a chief privacy officer. So for those of that are, maybe listening and are interested in this space, but don't really know a lot about it, what are the roles and responsibilities typically of a chief privacy officer?
Sure. Usually a chief privacy officer sits high enough in the organization that they have visibility across all the products, all the activities of the organization. Typically, a privacy officer will work with the product teams to understand what the products are doing, how you're building or improving and evolving the products and services, to be able to make sure that you really understand how data is being gathered and processed and stored and used, and what third parties are involved with that process, and how to make sure that all of those pieces are consistent with your overall privacy policy and your privacy message. The privacy officer is also going to be working with engineering teams to make sure that all of those requirements are built. You're going to be working with your marketing and communications people to be able to convey that message, a message of confidence and of clarity about your privacy practices to your customers or to your stakeholders. And the privacy officer is going to be working with the rest of the leadership of the organization to make sure that all of the policies and practices are consistent across the organization, that they make sense for the organization, and that there's accountability across the organization, which is why a chief privacy officer is a chief. They are somebody who needs to have that responsibility, that visibility, and needs to have the expectation that they're going to be taken seriously. Otherwise, you run the risk of privacy sort of devolving to whoever thinks about it, whoever is aware of it and cares enough about the issue to incorporate it in whatever they're doing. There are a lot of organizations who recognize they have risk here, and the evolution and the maturity of that organization comes out in how they are able to give life to that as a piece of their overall corporate strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds like they're, it's a highly cross-functional role, working, essentially, being a resource to product, being a resource to engineering, and also setting up those processes and programs to make sure that, whatever the company's essentially, stance from a privacy perspective is actually upheld, and also being a resource in terms of expertise on what should the company be thinking about from a privacy perspective. How does the actual function grow and what's it end up looking like within a larger organization? Who's on the team? Does this end up being potentially, the chief privacy officer ends up with a, fairly large organization, and as the privacy program grows with the growth of the company?
Well, it always depends on how your organization is doing, what it's doing. What data are you gathering? How many people are you gathering data on? If you're a consumer-facing organization with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of customers who you're gathering data on, data is going to be a very important piece of your business and is going to necessitate having some focus and some resources. So, an organization like Disney or a major consumer-facing entity will have a large team. A startup may just wind up having someone in the legal organization who kind of wears a privacy hat until there is enough of a growth and evolution in the company to be able to support having a separate privacy officer. The nature of the organization is going to dictate sort of the shape of that organization. When I worked for Yahoo many years ago, we had a privacy team of about 12 people. They were actually unlike a lot of organizations, the privacy team was actually part of the marketing department at Yahoo, not because it was seen as a marketing activity, but it was actually seen as part of protecting the corporate brand. Because there was so much consumer data, so much consumer-facing activities, their concern was that privacy needed to be a core message of how the company did its work and protected people's information. And so it was seen as brand protection. But that's unique to that organization. A healthcare organization may have very different priorities, but will oftentimes need a robust privacy function in order to meet things like, in the United States, the HIPAA has both privacy and security components and has requirements that there be a privacy officer and a security officer in order to have someone responsible for enforcing policies and monitoring the activities of the organization. And depending on how sprawling your hospital is or your insurance company, you could need a team of 5, 10, 50, or 100 people.
And then, besides things like HIPAA that kind of, give you some indicator that actually say that you need a chief privacy officer, or and I realize that this question is going to be highly dependent on the type of company that they're building, or the type of product they're building, and the type of data they're handling. But when should a company kind of be thinking about building a privacy function? Like, what are some of those like signals, I guess, that would indicate as a founder or leader within a company is like, okay, maybe I need to start thinking about building this out?
I think the first thing is to understand how important personal data is to your organization, to your product or service. So if you are, dependent on information about your customers in order to derive value, in order to create products or services, or to drive and feed the products and services, then data is critically important to you, and the protection of that data is going to be necessarily as important, or should be as important to you as everything else you do with that data. I mean, if data is one of your core business assets, then it needs to be treated as such, and not just how to maximize the value from it, but how to make sure that you continue to be able to utilize and recognize the value of it. Because if you run into a major privacy or security issue that compromises the value of your critical asset, you're toast. So looking at how your organization values data and how important it is to your mission is going to be a key driver. If it's just an ancillary activity, if all of your data is only related to, maybe advertising campaigns or something like that, then, and your main product is tractors or airplanes or something, well, then your privacy issues are going to be a little bit different. Doesn't mean that they are not going to be important, but they may not be as central as if you're, let's say, a financial services company who's looking to not just protect people's money, but also to leverage the information you have about who they are and how they spend their money to augment or to build out new products and services. So data, you may be a fintech company, but you're really a data company. You may be an advertising company, but you're really a data company.
Pardon the interruption, but it's me, Sean, the host, talking to you directly. I hope you're enjoying the episode, and if so, please subscribe and leave a positive rating and review. You can also join the Partially Redacted community at skyflow.com/community to make show suggestions, interact with me, other listeners, and privacy experts and enthusiasts. All right, now back to the show.
Yeah, and I imagine that's more and more true for many, many businesses. I think many businesses now see one of their most important assets is the data that they collect and the value they can derive from it, even if it's not something that they're like, selling that data, but they're using that data essentially to figure out what product should we build? How do we deliver higher ROI to our business? How do we build new features that are going to serve our customers better? All that comes from analyzing a lot of essentially the customer data that they're collecting, as well as behavioral data of how the people are interacting with the product.
Yep. And privacy and security issues can make that data radioactive. And how valuable is it going to be at the end of the day if you can't use it, if your partners can't trust the data that you're utilizing, sharing for their benefit, or whatever the case may be? It's a constant fight to understand how you're using your data, what value you need to place on it, and then how do you build policies and programs that protect the value and the integrity of that data.
Mm-hmm. So let's say that, I'm a founder and I realize that I should hire a privacy officer or build out a privacy function, but I have no experience with it. And I just kind of know I need to do it. Maybe some advisor suggested, or maybe just from like reading things, I realize that I have a lot of this radioactive material that I want to make sure that I can use and protect. Where do I start? Like, how do I know what to look for in a potential candidate?
Well, typically folks will start out by asking sort of the legal questions of their legal counsel. So they'll turn to an outside firm and see, sort of is what we're doing legal? Is what we're doing meeting the laws and regulations that apply to us? What laws and regulations even apply to us? And that can be your starting point for understanding what a privacy person needs to be aware of in your organization, what expertise, what knowledge set they need to bring to the table. If you have, and as we used to see a lot in organizations, privacy being part of someone's portfolio already in-house. So maybe you've got a compliance attorney, maybe you've got, it's just a general purpose sort of utility infielder attorney that's helping you with everything from, your business leases to your day-to-day sales agreements. And maybe they're aware of privacy issues. Sometimes they are the best source of, all right, here are our major privacy and data protection questions that we face. Here's the skill set somebody's going to need to be aware of. Going into like a healthcare organization, familiarity with applicable healthcare privacy and data protection laws is going to be very useful. You don't always need a lawyer, though. I've seen a lot of some of the most capable privacy executives that I've met are not lawyers. They were subject matter experts in their fields who deeply understood what that company was doing, the products and services, and were able to learn enough about the privacy and data protection issues that they were able to become a privacy officer. So don't get in the mindset that you must hire an expensive lawyer type person to do this, because you can often find expertise in the subject matter and add the privacy expertise on top of it. Indeed, that's why the International Association of Privacy Professionals has so many training courses and certification programs to help people who are not necessarily lawyers be able to sharpen their skills and understand. And that's another piece that I would add to it is things like certifications can help an individual demonstrate their knowledge and skills in this space. So if you've determined that you want to have a privacy professional, look for someone who holds some of those certifications, expertise in European law or expertise in the technology around data protection issues or management of privacy and data governance activities. There's certifications, there's other experience that can help you understand that someone's got the skill set and has the capabilities to do this.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think sets like a great privacy officer apart from maybe like an average one?
I think the ability to translate the sort of the legal and regulatory requirements into the operational activities of an organization, to be able to kind of do that translation from what a sometimes complex and obtuse law or regulation says, and how to turn that into something that you could tell an engineer, all right, we need to build it with the following capabilities, the following features. That translation ability is really critical, and I think sets privacy professionals apart from pretty much any other sort of policy oriented folks. And that's also why I think relying on a law firm, for example, for your privacy stuff, is far less valuable and somewhat problematic sometimes versus having someone in-house. Law firms are really good at giving you sort of the state of the law and an understanding of where regulators might be at any given moment. But you need someone who is really embedded in the organization, who understands your products, who can sit down with a product manager or an engineer and really sort of pick apart the details. And that's not something that law firms are very good at. You need someone who can sit down in that organization with the right people, whiteboard stuff out, and really craft a solution. And indeed, even if your privacy officer isn't a lawyer, they can help spot the issues that you could take to a lawyer and get an opinion on some finer point of regulatory risk. But what really I think sets folks apart in this space is the ability to get down in the weeds with the subject matter experts in your organization to craft a solution that is really closely linked to whatever the heck is going on in your organization.
Yeah, I think, that advice echoes a lot of what I've heard from other privacy professionals that I've interviewed on this program is, they talk about how, especially from an operational standpoint, to do this right, privacy really needs to be part of not only the culture of the company, but basically baked into the product development process. They should be in those conversations at the beginning. But, it's not a matter of checking a box just before launch with a privacy program to make sure that, they're following the policies of the company or something like that. You need somebody that's in there from the very beginning to make sure that things are being done right. But it's also a conversation. It's not just about putting up barriers. It's more, working with the product team as a colleague to figure out how do we do this in the way that is going to protect people's privacy, do the right things for our company, do the right things for our customers, but still allow us to build whatever it is that we're trying to build.
Exactly. I think, one of the most interesting things and at some level a fairly gratifying thing that I've seen over the last almost 25 years in the space here has been early in my career trying to argue to organizations that privacy should be embedded in their organization, that you need to work it into the product development cycles, into the engineering process, into the messaging from the organization. And to now see, back in, was it 2018 when the European law, the GDPR, came into effect, there was an entire sections of GDPR talking about privacy by design, how to make sure that you're integrating privacy into your product design and building process. There's provisions of GDPR that said, hey, you need to document these things. We were always arguing, in the early 2000s that you needed to have someone focused on privacy issues, and they needed to do, documentation around what you're doing and the like. And that stuff is now part of the law. So it's not just a good idea. It's not just a practical perspective that you should have and something that a forward-thinking organization is implementing. But stuff like privacy by design is literally written into the law. And the expectations are that these processes are in place in your organization. They don't always have to be, like I said, a team of 10 or 15 or 20 people doing everything. It doesn't have to be the most formalized structure that you might see in a 70,000 person multinational company with, billions in revenue. This can be something that a small startup can do. Someone just needs to be focused on the tasks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're doing it, early and making this a priority, of course, it's going to help solve or make a lot of the challenges that big organizations face later on when they try to do this, very late in the stage, because there's just going to be so many problems to kind of try to get a handle on once they're potentially serving a large customer base with a lot of different data, a lot of different technology and tools being used. If you didn't have that program in place, it's going to be a huge hurdle to kind of, go through and audit everything and figure out what's going on and then put those correct controls in place.
Well, it's super important to also remember that not only do you need to have your own stuff buttoned up, but you need to understand how you're relying on vendors and third parties, and make sure that those organizations have their stuff buttoned up as well. Vendor management and the risk present from utilizing vendors and third parties is one of the biggest headaches of a privacy officer. It's a constant struggle to make sure you understand what's happening in those other organizations that you're reliant upon. And anytime you're placing your reputation at risk, but it's scary. But if you're placing your reputation in someone else's hands, you've got to really understand what risk they bring to the table and how they're addressing it. So being able to rely on vendors and third parties who have a compelling story of their own about how they're protecting data, how they're protecting your data, and how they've done all of these things, privacy by design, and the messaging that they have around their policies and practices can be just as important and just a big headache for any organization.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the challenges I've seen with some companies is that even when a privacy organization exists, they can often be kind of under-resourced, and I say underappreciated. What are your suggestions or thoughts on how a privacy officer can work within an organization to prevent something like this from happening?
Yeah, but privacy officers do not usually have very big budgets. They are oftentimes left to sort of operate like sort of like guerrilla war in an organization. You're sort of begging, borrowing, and stealing other people's resources. But the good thing is that I've always found that most organizations understand and the individuals understand at an inherent level why privacy is important, why these issues are problematic, and if you can raise them in a compelling way to these folks, you can oftentimes get a little bit of time, get this on their radar, and so you don't always need to have huge resources, but that said, there are tools and capabilities that only come with having sufficient resources. So I mentioned documenting your practices, making sure you can understand your data flows and how you're processing data is super important and requires time and effort, and can be made a lot more useful and scalable if you are using certain types of tools, or you have vendors who give you the capability to see how the data flows are, what data is being used in what ways, and help you to document that stuff in consistent and up-to-date ways. I've always found that an organization treats privacy oftentimes a lot like they treat security, in that you are paying for everything to be quiet. You don't often. You're not able to always assign a dollar value to the thing that didn't happen. And security professionals have learned how to do that over the years. They've found metrics that say, well, look how many attacks we've denied at the firewall, how many probes we blocked and rejected, or things like that. And the extent to which you can find those sorts of metrics to bolster the value of a privacy program, the better you are able to justify certain expenditures of resources. So, for example, right now, most U.S. organizations who have any sort of operations in California need to be able to demonstrate how quickly they respond to requests for information from consumers, and how many times people have opted out, and they need to be able to keep those statistics. And there are tools that enable you to do that, so that it's not a manual, piece by piece process, and being able to show, all right, we've gotten X number of requests, and we could save X number of staff hours by buying this tool, or utilizing this third-party service. That's the kind of metric that you can use to show and justify certain expenditures.
And what are your thoughts on sort of the future of the privacy officer? Do you think that they will get to a place where they, own more budget, maybe carry more authority within an organization? And is that something that's changed even in your own time in roles like this?
Yeah, indeed. I've seen a transformation over the years from, this being sort of a task assigned to someone, to having its own individual appointment, like a chief privacy officer, to that privacy officer building out a team of analysts and sometimes even engineers to support those activities. I've started to see a merging of privacy and security roles into sort of a more comprehensive role, like a trust officer. Who still has security teams and privacy teams under them, and may still even have a separate security officer, a CISO, and a privacy officer under them. But starting to see them roll up into kind of what Yahoo did in the mid 2000s with having the privacy role in the marketing function. They saw it as brand protection. They saw it as it wasn't articulated as much back then as trust, but you are now seeing chief trust officers who are tasked with making sure that your organization has a strong message around how you're protecting data, how you're honoring the trust placed in you by your customers and your partners, and in turn, what are you doing to ensure that your products and services continue to live up to those trust expectations? So that's where I see things going, kind of a merging of privacy, security, other sorts of data protection and data governance issues, all rolling into this broader umbrella of trust.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you at some point, especially as companies are storing and processing more and more data, you need somebody in essentially that really senior level position that's has essentially the macro view over everything that's going on and looking at this from holistically across security, privacy, maybe even other functional areas of, what are we doing essentially to protect it? How are we utilizing the data? How are we essentially making sure that we continue to be a trusted company with the customers that we're serving?
Exactly. You have to have someone at a high enough level of the organization with that visibility, with the ability to shape and influence the overall corporate strategy. If data is that big a part of your future, you need someone really watching the store there. Someone deeply knowledgeable about what your data is, how you're using it, and what your risks are and how you're managing those risks. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly playing sort of a catch-up game, trying to kind of patch holes and keep things cobbled together. You can't do that and grow and scale and fly if you're constantly sort of trying to scoop it all up and and it's falling through your fingers.
Mm-hmm. So as we start to wrap up, do you have anything else you'd like to share in terms of advice for companies that are thinking about investing in privacy programs, or even for individuals out there that are looking to move into a privacy career?
I do get a lot of folks who reach out to me on LinkedIn, and anyone who has questions who's listening to this podcast, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and reach out. There is an understanding of the importance of privacy and data protection, and people in all sorts of parts of the organization are recognizing the issues arising within their part of the organization and are looking to learn more. And I oftentimes refer folks to the training courses and the conferences, and there's tons of free webinars and things to learn more about privacy issues, and not just the law, not just explain to me what GDPR means or what the new California law or the new law in Virginia or wherever, but also how do I translate that into my world? How do I make that law mean something in my product or my day-to-day engineering work? Mm-hmm. And there's lots of resources out there. And for people who want to make that a specialty, there are lots of opportunities. There's a huge space right now in privacy engineering where there's just a growth of kind of the professionalism in that space. People really understanding that we need to structure our learning and understanding of how to bring privacy into the engineering process. And that's creating a whole new sort of track for people in the engineering space, and it's really, really cool. But I think that for folks who are looking to get into the space, there's lots of opportunities. And for organizations who are recognizing the need for privacy and better understanding and a better grasp of how to manage privacy and data protection risks in their organization, leverage that curiosity. Have a brown bag lunch and find somebody who can come and talk about privacy and data protection issues. And you might find folks have their curiosity sparked. And you might have a bunch of burgeoning people who are happy to work on privacy issues in your organization without you needing to hire a new privacy officer right off the bat. You might have folks who are great candidates to move up in your organization, to go beyond just being an engineer or a product manager into one of those privacy roles that they can train for and rise up through your organization. Because like I said before, some of the very best people in the space that I've ever met are not lawyers. They were subject matter experts within their organization who learned the privacy issues and brought those to the table.
Yeah, I've met a number of people who've ended up in, long careers in privacy that describe how their start is, I fell into it. It was essentially no one was doing it. They raised their hand at whatever company they were working for. And then those opportunities existed. Luckily, the company said, yeah, go, own this, take care of this. And that's kind of how they started, and they were able to create these careers for them. So I agree. I think within any organization, there's a lot of people who are, just interested in this space and they want to learn more. And that's an opportunity to leverage some of your own folks to start building or laying the groundwork essentially for these privacy programs. And you mentioned, your LinkedIn, IAPP. I'll include those links, of course, in the show notes. But Ray, I want to thank you so much for being here. I'd love to have you back at some time down the road. You have so much experience and knowledge. There's probably a million things we could talk about, but thank you so much and cheers.
I've enjoyed it, Sean. Thank you so much.